Let's talk today about layering and mixing colours with coloured pencils. And it seems the general feeling is in order to draw a realistic drawing, you need to own a massive set of pencils, say a set of 60. But that's not the case. Now I'm going to show you today how to draw with just a set of 12 pencils. You can actually mix all of the colours you need from a set of 12. So I've selected to draw this little ladybird. Let me really show you what my thought process is and how I go about gradually building these colours. Now before we get started, if you do want to draw this with me in a lot more detail, it is available on my Patreon. In fact, I have a huge variety of loads of different coloured pencil tutorials drawing a variety of subject matter. Each tutorial includes detailed instructions, all of the real-time footage, details of all of the colours I'll be using, sketch outlines, and of course the reference photo. Some of the tutorials are a little bit faster, like this one, but I also have some much more complicated drawings. Check out the link in the description. So let's start drawing this little ladybird, and as always I want to start with a series of base layers. So what I'm going to do is start by drawing the lightest colour in each section. So I'm starting off on the ladybird itself, and the lightest colour on, for example, the spots and on the head of the ladybird is a light grey. Now in my set of 12 I don't have a light grey. What I do have is a black that I can press lightly with. So I'm going to mark in all of these first key shapes so lightly with the black pencil. As you can see, I'm not using it in a way to try and make it look a really dark black. That's not the goal here. I just want to get something marked in. Now it's worth remembering that when drawing, to be honest, when drawing with anything, but particularly when drawing with only a set of 12, you want to be pressing really nice and lightly, because in order to build up all of the colour within the drawing, we're going to need to build a lot of colours on top of each other. We need to press lightly so that we're able to build those colours up. If we just pressed really hard with the pencil at this point, we would already be filling up the tooth of the paper and we wouldn't be able to put a huge amount more of the pencil down. So you can see here I'm lightly using this black pencil. I've marked in the key shapes on the head, and now I'm just going over the spots, getting the main shapes marked in here nice and lightly, and I will build up the colour on these black spots a little bit later. So now I'm happy with the lightest colours on the black areas of the ladybird. I can start thinking about the ladybird's body. Now you might think that a ladybird's body is red, and it is, but I'm working from a reference photo here, and the lightest colour on the body of the ladybird on the reference photo is actually much more of an orange. So I'm going to use the orange in my set to put a nice light cover of this colour all over the back of the ladybird. There are a few areas I'm avoiding, particularly close to the head where there's just a light reflection, so the lightest colour there is white. I'm going to leave that. But for the rest of the body, I just want to put this down so that I can kind of get the general shapes. Already it doesn't look realistic, but it does look like a ladybird. So now let's move on to the lightest colour on the flower bud, and actually the lightest colour here is a green, and this is the closest green that I have. There's only 2 greens in the set of 12. These are Polychromos pencils that I'm using here, and neither I would say are particularly close to the green of the flower bud in the reference photo, but this is probably the closest. The lighter green is the closest. So we'll start with this colour for now, putting a really nice covering of this colour down to begin with, and then we're going to build up a lot more colours on here to really tweak it so that hopefully it looks much closer to that reference. Now the main thing I want to do whilst drawing here is to be constantly comparing my drawing to the reference photo. In order to try and match these colours, I constantly want to be thinking about the main colour that's missing. So once I put down all of this green, I'm actually noticing that where the light's catching the flower bud, there are a couple of areas of light blue. So let's add this in, not a huge amount, but just a little bit. And you can see that that is quite drastically really adjusting the colour of the green just in these couple of patches. Even though I'm putting down such a small amount of the pencil, I do think it changes the colour a lot. So do bear that in mind. So now let's take another look at the ladybird's body, and I want to be looking for the next darkest colour. So the next darkest colour is a red. So I'm going to start filling in the key shapes with this red. So don't necessarily expect it to be a perfect match. As I say, because this is only a set of of 12, I don't have a choice of a variety of different reds. So I need a red, and this is the only red that's available to me. So basically it'll have to do, and we're going to work with it and adjust it if we need to. So I'll fill in all of the areas that I think need to be a much brighter red, really get these shapes marked in, and then I can draw my attention back to the flower bud. And the flower bud is looking way too light at the moment. I want to have a much darker green. Now again, I've only really, if I want to use an actual green pencil, I've only got the choice of 2 greens. I've already used the lighter green, so let's use the darker green. It is a darker green, but it's also a very brightly coloured dark green. And I pretty much want to be putting this on all of the areas that is the green of this kind of darkness level or darker. So if there are any areas of this flower bud that do need to be darker than this green, I can still put the green in those areas, and then I'll be able to adjust and darken down that green as we build up the layers. And as I say, I do think it's looking way too bright at the moment. I also think right now the drawing doesn't really have any contrast, and that's why it looks quite cartoony. But that's okay. I just want to gradually work from these lighter colours towards the darker colours on each section, gradually building up that colour. As I say, we want to be going for the closest match at this point, and it doesn't need to be perfect. If we go for the closest match, then we can always adjust it from there. Now, something that I think is very important to bear in mind when you're drawing anything, but particularly when you're drawing with fewer colours, is that the colour is maybe not as important as you might think. Now, I am going to do my best to get this colour, this flower bud, for example, to match the reference photo as much as possible, but I'm not necessarily going to be able to get it to be a perfect match. But as long as I get the contrast right, and the colours are reasonably accurate, then it'll be fine. It doesn't need to be perfect to look realistic. So do bear that in mind. I don't think you need to be really worried about trying to make it perfect and to keep building up the colours indefinitely to try and get perfection, because I don't think it's necessary. So with contrast in mind, let's start working towards some of the darker colours now. And one of the darker colours in my set is this pencil. It's a very dark brown. It's not the darkest pencil. The darkest pencil is obviously the black, but this is a really good colour for me to use on the back of the Ladybird, for example. In the deep shadows here that are more of a reddish brown, I can build these up with this brown, and if I need to, I can always put the red over the top to make it more of a reddish brown. So I can use this brown to add in the darker shadows on the back of the Ladybird, on the Ladybird's body, and I'm also going to use this same brown to add in all of the shadows on the flower bud. As I say, right now it's looking way too light and it hasn't got any contrast really at all. So I can use this brown to do both. Now again, with the green section, bear in mind that if I want this brown to look more green, I can put green over the top of it in a second and it will just slightly adjust the brown colour. So that's already looking much, much better. You can really start to see the overall shape of the flower bud. And even though we're adding brown here, as I say, I don't think it looks as brown as you might have expected it would. So I'm going to keep building up some of this colour on some of the areas that I do want to be a deeper shadow. And then at this point, I've got a really good framework. All of those key colours are roughly marked in. And what we want to do is really start tweaking and mixing these colours a little bit more. So start working through this a little bit faster. As I mentioned, the Ladybird's body, I think, is more of an orange rather than a red. You just assume it's a red because Ladybirds are red. But from what I can see on the reference photo, it looks far more orange. So I can think about adding, I've got this kind of orangey brown in this set. I think that that is the closest colour right now that needs to be added. What I'm thinking about whilst building up the colours at this point is what is the most obvious colour that's missing in each section. So the most obvious colour that was missing on the Ladybird was a much brighter, more vibrant body, which had this orange tone to it. So I can build up the body with this orangey brown. But that has made some areas of the back as well as the spots look way too light. And I'm actually using the walnut brown here. Although the spots, again, generally you think of them as black, but a lot of them have this kind of slight brown undertone. It's kind of a blackish brown. So I can add the brown in at this point and then add the black lightly over the top of that just to make it pop and make it a closer match to the reference. So as I mentioned, the Ladybird's head is much more of a grey colour, but it does have some areas that are pretty much jet black. So I can just go over those very dark areas, really define some of the shapes on the head here. I'd say that colour wise, this is reasonably simple. And then let's draw our attention back to the flower bud. So now that I added that brown in the previous section, I think it's not looking green enough. Now I still don't think that this is the right green, but I do think it's the closest colour right now to the colour that's missing. So I can go over all of the brown section with this green, and you can see that I still have the contrast, but it's just brighter. I then think, comparing the drawing to the reference photo, that the green isn't looking quite yellow enough. It looks more like olive green in the reference photo, but what I have is a very, very bright green. So I've only got one yellow in my set that I can use. So I'm going to use this very bright yellow, and that's making a very bright, more sort of lemony green, but I think it is closer to the olive green. Now what I want to be doing here is always trying to make the color that little bit closer. It doesn't need to be perfect, but I just want to be making it that little bit closer to what it looks like in the reference photo. So now I think some of the lighter areas are missing the blue. Right at the very beginning, I mentioned that I can see some blue areas on the lighter patches, but they're looking a little bit too muted at this point. So I'm going to go back to this blue and build up some more of this color on the lighter spots. And even though I'm only adding this blue to those lighter areas, it kind of feels like it's toning down the yellow. It almost doesn't feel as bright green as it did. And this is why I always like to focus on the most obvious color that's missing, because even when it's just adding blue to the lightest areas, it's amazing how much it changes the whole section. So I just work one color at a time. From here I can use the black pencil. I really want that central line down the center of the flower bud to be just a bit darker. It's just not popping. Now it does look a little bit too harsh with the black, but using that black is the only way to get the contrast that I particularly need here, and I will be able to go over the top of it with other colours to tone it down. Now looking again at my green section, I think it's looking maybe a bit too yellow at this point, so I can use a darker blue. It's a different blue to the blue we were using before. It's the darker one in the set, and I'm going to go over all of the green, again pretty much everywhere that I put that walnut brown a little while ago, and that is massively changing the type of green that we have here. It's looking much kind of richer. It's looking a little bit less bright to me. Now I maybe want to tone down the blue a little bit, but not too much. So what I want to do is add in the complementary color to blue. So the color on the opposite side of the color wheel. The color on the opposite side of the color wheel to blue would be an orange. I don't want to use the really bright orange. I think that's going to be too much. So I'm going to use this orangey brown that I used before. And you can see that that's just really toning down that blue. It's still got that nice sort of richer green color, but it's just a less vibrant version of that richer green. And so I'm still working my way through here. It's particularly the flower bud that needs a lot of mixing of the colors. And now at this point, I think I've lost a lot of the contrast, and I really want to tone down that green a little bit more. So I'm going back over it, once again increasing that contrast with the dark brown. And quite quickly, this is turning into a much more earthy green, just from mixing actually relatively few colors. It's amazing what a difference quite quickly it makes. So I can add a little bit of extra black just on a couple of areas to help a few areas pop a bit better. And then I can go back to the blue, maybe tone down those lighter areas a little bit. You can see how lightly I'm putting some of this blue over the top, just to maybe tone down some of that yellow or some of the lighter green that we added. And then I can draw my attention back to the Ladybird. I do want to add a more vibrant orange at the top. I just think that it needs a hint more orange. And as I say, this is the only orange that I have available to me. And then after a few final tweaks on particularly the Ladybird's face And that is it. So that is essentially how I always go about mixing colours, particularly if I'm using a smaller set. I want to start off by building up the lightest colour I can see in each area, and then I can gradually work my way towards the darkest colours I can see in each area. It doesn't need to be perfect matches, I'm just looking for the closest colour. So if there's a red in the area, then I have to use the only red that's available to me. Once I got to those darkest colours, what I want to be doing is focusing on one area, one colour at a time, and thinking about the most obvious colour that's missing. So maybe you've got a purple area that you think needs to have a little bit more red to it. Do that first before moving on to the next colour. And I keep doing that until I think that the drawing matches the reference photo reasonably well. As I say, it doesn't need to be a perfect match. The most important thing is to get the contrast right. Now, if you want to check out another video where I draw with the set of 12, I talk all about layering and creating a nice little rose drawing here, so do check that out. Happy drawing, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.